We all remember that one teacher who changed our lives. But let me ask you a critical question. Do we ever stop to examine the system that created them? Today, I invite you to analyze that creation process, not just the success stories, but the systemic reality. Good day, everyone. My research is titled Evaluating the TESL Practicum Ecosystem at IPG Campus, Tun Abdul Razak, a CIPP-based Triadic perspective. Now, to understand the urgency of this study, let's visualize the teacher training system as a funnel. So at the top, we have the global priority, the world's need for quality education and English proficiency. And this flows into Malaysia's national goal, where the education blueprint aims for global employability. Of course, these big ideas are taught through IPG training program, and finally, everything hits the third space. Yeah, the third space. This is the most critical part. Okay, it's where a trainee's book knowledge meets the messy, the unpredictable reality of a real classroom, and this is where my study focuses. Right. While the third space is intended to be a professional bridge, okay, the current ecosystem is defined by a fractured pathway between pedagogical theory and classroom reality. The study will investigate this disconnect through four critical dimensions of CIPP model. Yeah, it will examine the poor infrastructure and connectivity in Sarawak's rural schools that hinder digital assessment practices. For example, at IPGKTAR, PSMP teacher trainees, they are required to use My Practicum as the online assessment system. And of course, the study done by Cho and Cobb 2021 stated that physical and financial constraints actually cause relative shock among the teacher trainees during practicum. Yeah, and this study seeks to explore how vague guidelines and lack of access to a specific assessment documents during practicum, studied by Empart et al. 2021, uh, actually revealed that it creates role ambiguity and high anxiety among the teacher trainees. Okay? And a primary focus will be the phenomenon of triadic dissonance, whereby this research will analyze the conflicting feedback that the teacher trainees receive when the expectations of the supervising lecturer and school mentor, they are not aligned, just like the study that was done by Bashir et al. 2023. And finally, the study will evaluate this human cause of systemic failures, okay? Specifically measuring the product, the impact on burnout, and also the psychological resilience. Of course, the core issue here is when the ecosystem is fractured. The teacher trainees, they are not able to close the theory practice gap. Okay, and because we see these four fractures in the ecosystem, therefore this study aims to holistically evaluate the TESL teaching practicum ecosystem at IPGKTAR using Staffel Beam's CIPP model from a triadic perspective. Yeah, there are four research objectives developed. Number one is to determine the level of adequacy regarding the practicum preparation, of course, followed by evaluating the ASL trials per sections on the effectiveness of the implementation of teaching practicum, assess the level of tenure regarding the product of TESL teaching practicum, and lastly, to examine the relationship between the context, input, process, and product of TESL teaching practicum at IPG Qatar. Right. This slide shows why my study is unique. Yeah. And this study is filling four major gaps in the current research. Okay. Most studies only look at relationship between two people, dyads, while I am looking at triad, teacher trainees, school mentors, as well as supervising lecturer. And instead of just using one method, I'll be using a sequential explanatory approach. Okay, this means that I will use data to see what is happening and then interview to understand why it's happening. Yeah, previous studies also focus on grades alone, while this study will focus at the human side, the well-being and resilience of the teacher trainees. And while others look at general teaching, I am focusing on the specific struggle of online assessment within the IPG context. Now, To analyze this complex ecosystem, yeah, this study will employ a multi-layered diagnostic lens, and layer one is the macro lens. The macro lens, Staffel-Bean CIPP model acts as a systemic scanner. It provides the structure to evaluate the context, environment, the input, the strategies, process implementation, and of course the product, the outcome. It tells us what is happening in the system. And layer two, the study integrates the Vygotsky sociocultural theory to look uh, to evaluate the human dynamics and also view the practicum as a social space. And this study also used positioning theory to analyze the power dynamics, yeah, whether the mentor acts as a judge or as a scaffold. This explains why the process is a success or a failure. Okay, and this is the conceptual framework of the study and illustrate the logic of the study from readiness to resilience. Of course, on the left, we have the preparatory phase, the context and input, which represents the readiness of the ecosystem. And then, for example, the infrastructure, the handbook, yeah, and then the arrow indicates causality. For example, the readiness determines the quality of the supervisory phase, the process, yeah. If the readiness is poor, then the social interaction in the third space will suffer. Okay, and of course, lastly, we have the outcome phase. For outcome phase, is the product. Yeah, this flow directly informs my research question form. Okay, where this will statistically test if the preparation on the left actually predicts the outcome. For example, resilience on the right. Yeah, and to study the teacher training system, this research will use explanatory sequential design. This means that the study will collect both numbers and also stories to get a full picture. Okay, so this study will take place at IPG campus to Abdul Razak, and participants are 300 members of the TESL Triad. Okay, and data collection will be carried out as shown in the flow chart. Okay, and phase one quantitative, the researcher will send a survey to the participants using Google Form and then analyze using SPSS. And of course, the second phase, qualitative, semi-structured interview will be conducted. For this part, purposive sampling will be used to ensure that people interviewed are the ones that can best explain the patterns from the quantitative data. Yeah, and ethical integrity is very important. Okay, so the study aims to ensure participant protection, while the study ensures that data collection occurs during the practicum. Yeah, the raw data will remain anonymized, and of course, there will be confidentiality ensured for all triad members. And this protocol, along with formal approvals from the relevant parties, HREC, ERAS, JBN, FPGM, and to ensure that these participants can report on the ecosystem comfortably. Yeah, and this is a realistic 3-year roadmap: year one, year two, year three. And of course, to conclude, this research argues for a fundamental paradigm shift. For decades, yeah, the goal of teaching practicum has always been competence. Okay, this current study argues that our new goal, we're looking to new product resilience. Okay, and of course, by diagnosing these fractures in our ecosystem, this research provides the data needed to heal the entire ecosystem. Okay, we are moving towards a future where teacher training doesn't just certify teachers, right? Just graduate teachers, but it sustains them in their career. And my goal is to ensure that the third space is no longer a barrier, but a bridge to a sustainable teaching career. These are my references. Thank you.